Rev it up and welcome to Cars Yeah, show number 2506. Today, we're going to be talking about a legend, a Texan legend by the name of Jim Hall, an innovator, a racer, definitely a legend. Be prepared to be inspired.
This is Cars Yeah, where you'll enjoy interviews with inspiring automotive enthusiasts. Mark Green is here to provide you with a fuel injection of automotive inspiration. So get in, sit down, buckle up, and get ready for a wild ride here on Cars Yeah.
Hello, inspiring automotive enthusiasts, and welcome to Cars Yeah. Today I'm in Norman Beach, Florida. I'm told it's like the home of the original Speed. We'll understand that in a minute with a very special guest by the name of George Levy. George, welcome back to Cars Yeah. Do you have any gear? And are you ready to release the clutch?
I am ready to do so. Good to be here, Mark.
Well, thanks. I was looking back, and George was a very kind of an early guest show number 652 back in 2016 when we talked about one of his great books. And then he returned show number 1367, and that was back in 2019 before the world fell apart with COVID, when times were just so good. We were taking things for granted when we talked about his F1 Mavericks book. Today, he's back with a book that has taken years to make, but you'll understand why, because it's about a legend. But one thing I didn't ask you, George, the last couple times you're on the show, it's a new question I've had for some folks. What's one little thing that people don't know about George Levy?
I won a gold medal in the 400 meters at the Paris Olympics.
Just recently?
I'm joking, of course. I guess I'm an avid pickleball player. Not a good one, avid one.
You know, it's funny, pickleball, maybe it's we're somewhat probably in the same age group, has become prevalent. My sister has become a pickleball player fanatic. She's won tournaments. And I watched a video with a prominent doctor say that people that play sports like that, racket sports, live longer. And I would imagine so. How long have you been playing pickleball?
Just about a year, and they may live longer, but if you also talk to doctors, they say that pickleball has been the greatest boost to their business over the past 5 years, and we see it where we play. You know, I mean, a lot of the people who play are not spring chickens anymore, and it's pretty hard on knees and ankles and so on.
Yeah, my wife and I walk every day, and we've got, where we live in the community, we've got tennis courts, and they've converted almost all of them to pickleball courts. And yesterday, there was this massive group, and they were having a tournament. And I was saying, well, it's got to be a lot less jarring than tennis. And she said, I don't know. We stopped and watched for a while. And my sister said, yeah, you need to stay in shape because you can hurt yourself, twist ankles, or see people just falling flat on their face into the fence. But I'm glad that, for older folks, they found something to do outdoors and enjoy. So that sounds pretty cool. So we'll expect to see you in the next Olympics in LA in 3 years, the seniors pickleball Olympic tournaments. So I'll watch for you there, okay?
Sounds good.
All right, sounds good. Let me give you a little bit of an introduction here. We're going to dive right into this book. A Boston native, George Levy, although he's in Florida now, is the president of the Motorsports Hall of Fame of America and an author and a former editor of Autoweek magazine. He is also the author of multiple books on motorsports, two of which we talked about when he was here, the 2016's Can-Am 50th anniversary. He worked on that project with a good friend and a past Cars Yeah guest, Pete Biro, who, as I said, was a past guest here and well known for books in the past. And his last book when he was here, F1 Mavericks, the men and machines that revolutionized Formula One racing, was a sweeping account of innovative and glamorous period of Formula One racing. It's an incredible book, still available. It covers 1958. Yeah, that was the year I was born. That was a while ago, through 1982. And today he's here to share a new book from our friends at EVRO, the publishers, titled Texas Legend, Jim Hall and His Chaparrals. It's a story and the life about Jim, an official biography of the icon that is Jim Hall. I've got some roots in Texas, so I've got some passion for that there. We'll be back in just a moment, but first a word from our sponsors so to give them a little love. And we'll be right back. We're talking about Jim Hall racing, some very cool stuff. Sit tight. Are you ready to take charge of your financial future? Then let me introduce you to Capitalize Your Finances. It's an online course designed to empower you with the knowledge and tools for mastering your money. This course will help you lay out the ins and outs of budgeting, the importance of emergency funds, investing strategies, and how to plan for a secure retirement. All this presented by financial planner Chris Paniotu. Chris has developed this course to help you effectively navigate your world of finance with confidence. Stop stressing about money and start taking control. Enroll in Capitalize Your Finance online course today and pave your way to financial success. To learn more, go to capitalizepodcast.com/courses, or better yet, go to the Cars Yeah website, show notes page for today's show, and click on the link under Capitalize Your Finances. You'll be glad you did. Do it today. For several years now, you've heard me talk about Linkage Magazine. I've been a subscriber since the start. Their talented and creative team brings you a spectacular publication and website that shares the automotive passion from a worldwide perspective. Linkage is about driving, restoring, collecting, and first-hand experience at collector car auctions and more. They bring you real-world values plus rational, experienced opinions on the current markets. They cover the automotive world and the people who share our passions. And Linkage Magazine has grown, mailing you 6 issues annually. Join me on this journey with Linkage. They're geared for the automotive life. You can subscribe at linkagemag.com. So George, now we were chatting a little bit before we got on the phone today, and I asked you, this book is huge. It's 484 pages. It goes way back to the beginning, Jim's life, takes us through what he did, very detailed stuff. And I asked you, how long did this book take to create? And your answer kind of put me on the floor a little bit.
Yeah, it from start to finish, it was 6 or 7 years in the making.
Wow. And what were the primary reasons for that other than life gets in the way sometimes?
Yeah, well, there were life things like midway through that, I became the president of the Motorsports Hall of Fame, and that put demands on my time. Jim had some things happen in his life. But the main thing was that, with a subject as deep and as broad as this, just wanted to do an outstanding job, wanted to interview as many people as I could, and it took some time.
Did some of this was because, I've tried to get Jim on the show for a long time. He's a very shy guy, I guess I'll put it, at least when it came to me reaching out, and just wasn't really interested, didn't want to talk about himself. Did you encounter any of that with Jim, or did you form a really tight bond where that wasn't an issue?
Well, certainly once we got into the book, there was, we talked and talked and talked, dozens of times. But what you're talking about is exactly how the book started. When I was interviewing him for the Can-Am book way back in like 2015 or 16, he was telling me all sorts of stories that I had never heard before. And, like a lot of racing fans, I thought I knew a lot about Chaparral. There were several very good books. Dave Friedman did a great book on Chaparrals. Richard Falconer and Doug Nye did a great book on Chaparral. And yet here was all this information that I had never heard before. And I just said, Jim, is somebody doing a documentary or doing a book, because this should be captured somewhere? And I didn't know Jim. And so I didn't presume at all that he would want to do it with me, because he didn't know me from a hole in the wall. I assumed that if he was doing it, it would be with some old friend that he had known for years. And he said, well, that's just not really the way I've lived my life. I've tended to feel that you do stuff, and if people want to write about it, great, but you don't really go toot your own horn. And that's where the conversation ended. A couple of months later, I was talking to him again, and he said, I've been thinking about what you said, and I think I should do a book. And if you want to do it with me, let's do it together.
Oh, how fortunate that little conversation was. And it led to this magnificent book. And I'm so happy that he and you connected. Jim my interpretation, he's one of the greatest race car drivers of his generation. And he was really known better as an innovator, a designer, and a creator. And when you think about some of his cars, the high-wing Chaparral 2E Can-Am car, the 2F World Sports Car Championship contender. And I mean, he was, I dare say, one of the most influential race vehicle designers and builders of all time. Would you put him in that category?
Yeah, for sure. When you look at Formula One, even today, I point to two things. In Formula One, every Formula One car today has a half dozen or more innovations that Jim Hall brought to racing, and I'm not sure you could point to any other designer and come up with much more than that. So the fact that that is still happening, 60 years later, is pretty amazing. And then another one of his innovations was the vacuum cleaner, the suction car, and now Gordon Murray has a car that features suction. There are a small group from England that was featured in the book that set the all-time record at Goodwood, and by the way, is going after the all-time record at Laguna Seca and some tracks in this country, and the McMurtry car. So, all this stuff is still resident. 50, 60 years after Jim introduced them to the racing world.
Your comments bring a big smile on my face because I've been attending the Monterey Historics, and for 33 times I think I've been. In fact, this past week were the historic races in Pebble Beach, and it's the first time in 33 years I haven't gone. And I was there. I started taking my son when he was about 8 years old. He's 30 years old now. And we used to go to the track on Thursday before the historic started because you could jump into rides with the Skip Barber drivers, and they would lead vintage cars around the track. You kind of show them the line, people that had come there and not raced there before. And we were sitting on the wall, and up pulls Vic Elford driving Jim's vacuum car.
Wow.
And I looked at my son, I said, "You see that car?" And he goes, "Yeah, why is there a box on the back?" And we kind of explained it and got out, and I said, "Go over and ask Vic some questions about it." And my son walked over there and started asking, and Vic, of course, he's been a guest on the show when we still had him in our lives, and he started telling me all the story, let him sit in the car, and I said, "You just got to sit in a piece of history there." And he goes, "That's crazy. They came up with this, and then they told them they couldn't do it anymore." So yeah, that brought a big happy memory to my face. Jim was a Texan, and I've got roots in Texas. My dad was born and raised there. My grandparents had a farm there. And of course, there's that famous line, "Don't mess with Texas." How much do you think being a Texan had that cultural influence had on his success? Because he's one of those guys that just wasn't in his vocabulary.
Yeah, I think it was a big part, and when people read Texas Legend, I think they'll see that. In fact, I started the book off with an anecdote about the Yates Field and how Texans just in their DNA have this belief that individuals can do great things. They can overcome great obstacles, and if they work hard enough, might just do something extraordinary. And that's certainly a part of Jim's mindset and everything that he's made of.
He had a lot of battles with sanctioning bodies, the bureaucracies involved with that. And one of the questions I ask guests, and I've asked you this, is about challenges. But I want to tie this to Jim. And there's probably a whole list that you could come up with. But if you had to talk a little bit about one or two that you bring up in the book that were huge challenges that he overcame, what were the biggest ones in your mind?
Well, there are different types of challenges, but they were enormous. When he was a youngster, he lost his mother to cancer. He lost his dad and stepmom and older sister to a plane crash when he was a newlywed at like 18 years old and just starting out. And his dad had owned a pretty successful oil company, more about finding oil and where to drill than about oil itself. And these kids were 15, 18, 21 years old, and no parents, and this business that was in chaos, with the dad suddenly gone. And that was a huge challenge for all of them. And it's remarkable that they, all came through that terrible loss and upset in their lives as well as they did. And then, of course, in the racing world, Jim would point to just the constant battle with sanctioning bodies. Almost every major innovation either got banned, like the sucker cars, or even with the wings, where they tried to ban them and eventually scaled them back down to size or cut them down to size. So there were lots of obstacles, lots of challenges over the years.
When you think about wings, now it's like, what do you mean wing? Why are wings a problem? I mean, that's just so, they've been on cars for a long, long time. But at the time, it was like, what is he doing? What? And then they realize how fast the cars can go around the track. And of course, I'm sure the other folks are going, hey, stop this. I mean, it still happens today in Formula One, right? Somebody comes out with something that's completely different and new, and everybody screams, oh, why didn't we think of that? So let's just ban it. Were there other innovations that he came up with other than wings that are still occurring on cars these days?
Yeah, so, if you look at a modern Formula One car, the radiators are all mounted on the sides of the car. Nobody did that before Jim introduced that on the Chaparral 2E. And that changed so much. There was a safety component because as you've driven race cars, and if there's a radiator right in front of your feet, it doesn't matter how well
Right.
you're still going to bake your toes, and you're going to have elevated cockpit temperatures. And of course, today we have cool suits and things like that. But back in the day, guys just baked, and that was part of the reason why lap times and just general precision would start to wane towards the end, because guys got tired, they got fatigued. It was a safety issue. But more than that, it was a huge performance benefit, because suddenly you didn't need to have this big radiator opening in the front of the car, so you could change the front of the car and focus on downforce. And net downforce was really the one big innovation. If you tried to group most of what Jim did, he's really the guy who, I don't know if you'd say discovered net downforce, but he's the guy who figured out that was the next great frontier in vehicle performance. And now today, every type of race car, even off-road trucks, are using downforce as part of design.
Yeah, that's pretty incredible. When you look at that BA 1000, you see trucks with wings and things, and you think, what? But got to keep them on the ground. That's how the power gets put down. So you have a list at the front of this book of quotes from a lot of legends and icons in racing. Obviously, Jim made a huge impression on a lot of people around him. And I always like to talk a bit about inspiration. Who do you think were some inspirations for him? Like, who did he look up to? Or was he just so far out there new that he was just pulling things from the sky?
One of Jim's biggest influences was his older brother, Dick. Dick was a huge racing fan. He had a terribly aggressive form of arthritis, and so he was very limited in what he could do himself. But Dick helped Bobby Unser get his start in racing. Bobby, when I interviewed him, said, man, without Dick Hall, I don't know where I would have been. Dick introduced Jim to racing, and there's a real question whether Jim would have had the career that he had if it wasn't for Dick. And Dick also was a huge help with Carroll Shelby. And Carroll, through to the end of his life, said that without Dick Hall, there might not have ever been a Cobra or a Carroll Shelby as we know him.
That's a pretty amazing statement, isn't it?
Yeah.
Wow. Who do you think Jim inspired? That's probably too big of a question because of what he's done. But were there people, because you interviewed so many people for this, are there maybe a few legends, like you just surprised me with that comment from Carroll Shelby, that you learned when people said, yeah, if it wasn't for Jim Hall, I wouldn't be or never would have gotten to? Were there a few others like that you could share?
Oh, my God. There are
hundreds, probably.
A ton. And it was so much fun because I've reached out to people like Adrian Newey, Gordon Murray,
Oh my goodness.
Gianpaolo Dallara, and on and on. And all these guys talked about how much of an influence Jim and his ideas were on them, and a number of them that are our age talked about how that began when they built a Chaparral model as a kid, or picked up a Cox Chaparral slot car when they were kids.
The name Chaparral, when I look back at the models I used to build, something about that name just intrigued me. I don't know. It's cool to say, whatever it is. Where did that come from?
It's kind of a funny story. Sadly, the name of the person who came up with it is lost to history, but Jim's partner in the early days of Chaparral, and a huge part of the growth and success of Chaparral, was Hap Sharp, who was an Oklahoman who transplanted to Texas, and they both created Chaparral in Midland, Texas. And believe it or not, both those guys were polo players. And Midland had a polo club, and it was very active. And Hap particularly went on and continued playing polo for the rest of his life. And they were at the polo place, and they were on the fence talking one day. And they were trying to figure out, what they were going to do with this car and that they were building. And this goes back to the Troutman and Barnes, the Chaparral 1, before it had a name. It was just known as internally as the Riverside Racer. And there was a Mexican-American fella that was near them and heard the conversation. And he just piped in, "Chaparral."
Really?
And they're like, "Wait, what do you mean?" Chaparral, beep, beep, Roadrunner. That's what you should call your car. And Jim and Hap had one of those light bulb moments where they thought, oh, that's perfect. And that's where the name came from.
Oh, my gosh. Well, number one, you don't think of polo as a Midland, Texas sport. I mean, you think of it as the highbrow English guys, in front of the castle playing polo. That's pretty cool. But that's interesting. I didn't know that. Very interesting. Very cool. Well, the things you learn. I love it. Sometimes they just fit, but I do love that name. And I remember building Chaparral models as a kid and just loving how that sound, the way it rolls off your lips. What was the biggest challenge for you in writing this book? Because undertaking an official autobiography, especially somebody that's just a legendary icon like that, it's got to be a little bit daunting to be sure you get it all right, especially when somebody's still with us and you become friends with him and talking with him. You want it to pay tribute to the legend that he is. What would you say was the biggest challenge for you in writing the book?
There were lots of challenges, large and small. Certainly the project itself and wanting to make sure you got things right, and chasing things down was a big part of it. But, sometimes there were things that were just, sort of personal missions. Like, for example, while the Chaparral 2J was the first application of suction to road racing, most things have a precedent. Most things, the person who's most associated with them wasn't necessarily the first person to try it. They were the person who made it successful. They were the ones who figured out how to make it work. And so I looked at the idea of suction vehicles, and there was a guy back in, I think, the late 20s or early 30s who had got a patent for a suction passenger car. To anyone's knowledge, it never went anywhere, but that was a precedent. But the thing that became an obsession for me was that I don't know if you know drag racing much, but there was a guy in the 60s and early 70s named Pete Robinson, known as Sneaky Pete Robinson.
Yeah.
I don't know if he was a trained engineer like Jim was. Jim went to Caltech, and that was a big part of that training. That scientific rigor was a big part of what made him a success. But Pete was a very clever guy, and he actually attached a suction device, or created a suction device for his Top Fuel dragster a couple of years before Jim did the 2J sucker car. And it only raced once. It in fact didn't even race. It did one run down a track at a regional meet. But I was aware of the car, and I knew I was going to be mentioning that in Texas Legend. And I knew there was a photo of the car, but it was done by a guy named Jim Hill. I didn't know him, and I tried for a long time to track Jim down, and had just about given up. We were getting right before publication. I'm like, darn, I want that photo so bad, because I think it would be a good part of telling the story. And then at the last minute, I discovered that Jim Hill is still with us. He was a longtime journalist and racing photographer, and he happened to be living about 5 miles from the Motorsports Hall of Fame of
What?
America.
Oh my God. Well, the things you learn. Yeah, that's a sneaky Pete. Yeah, he built some interesting. He was around back in the early '60s, I believe, right?
Yeah, well, early and into the later '60s, he was primarily a Ford guy, and so he was running single overhead cam 427s long after everyone else had switched to Hemis. But he was still winning races. He had another innovation where he had an automatic jack system, and so when he was at the Christmas tree, he would jack the rear tires off the ground and start them spinning. And then when the green light came on, he would drop the rear
Oh
wheels
my gosh.
onto the pavement. The NHRA, banned that pretty quickly, but he was just a very clever guy who came up with a lot of innovative stuff.
Cool. Yeah, it's a name I haven't heard in a long time. Jim's legacy. The last chapter in the book, 31, I believe. You titled that Legacy. In your mind, what is Jim Hall's legacy?
I think there are a couple. First and foremost is just his legacy as an innovator. That his name and Chaparral have become synonymous with innovation. But at a more direct level, this net downforce revolution that he started has permeated not just racing, but production cars. When you and I were starting out, performance cars, the main number that people talked about was 0 to 60. And then over time, it'd be, okay, well, here's the skid pad number for that car. But today, whenever a new high performance car is introduced, a Corvette, a Ferrari, a Porsche, they all talk about the downforce that car generates. And that's all due to Jim Hall, and that's his legacy on both race cars and production cars.
Absolutely. So here's a good question for you. If you were going to pick one of his designs, his race cars, that is your favorite, which one would that be and why?
You know what? It keeps changing.
Yeah, I understand.
There are times when, certainly, I tend to be a fan of the high downforce cars and how those change racing. So the 2E, the high wing 2E, is I think is one of, if not the most influential race car of all time, and it's also beautiful, and it's so iconic. By the same token, its sibling, the 2F, was the fastest endurance racing car of its time, and won the only race that it finished at Brands Hatch. And believe it or not, the 2H, which was kind of the one Chaparral that it never won a race, it never really did perform in the way that Jim and anybody else hoped. But it was such a neat and radical idea that I also have a lot of affection for that car as well.
During your process of talking with him and writing this book, what was the biggest surprise?
Easily the biggest surprise was discovering Bob Jackson. Bob's a photographer. I didn't know him. All I knew was that when I sat down to do the book, I knew that I wanted to have just the best photography that we could possibly come up with. And we were so fortunate, Pete Biro, my longtime friend and collaborator, was the source of the single most photos. His work is terrific. But Bernard Caillet, Dave Friedman, Hal Crocker, Boyd, just a murderer's row of terrific photographers who are all featured in the book. But there was one big gap that I was trying to fill, and I was tearing my hair out, which is, once Jim becomes famous, there's lots of great photography, as you would expect. And his early years, there were family photos. It covered his childhood and his parents and so on. But his early days as an amateur racer, which is primarily in the mid to the late 1950s, these were tiny races, often unsanctioned or just local events. There weren't a lot of journalists or photographers. And the only good photos that I was even aware of all carried the same credit line, which was Bob Jackson. So, okay, simple. It's like, okay, I got to find Bob Jackson, or more likely, since this is now 70 years ago, I've got to find what happened to his archive. Hopefully, it didn't just get tossed to the winds. And I asked everybody I knew that was around Jim, still around, who was around Jim in the 50s. Hey, do you remember a guy named Bob Jackson? Do you have any idea where his archive is? And nope. Or yeah, I remember him, but that was 50 years ago. I have no idea what happened to him. I was literally down to the last guy. And I almost didn't even ask him because I was so used to getting no for an answer. I said, oh, yeah, by the way, Bob Jackson, he was a photographer back in the day. Do you have any idea what would have happened to his archive? There was a long pause. Something happened to Bob?
Oh goodness. Wow.
I'm like, wait. Bob is alive? Oh, yeah. No, we're friends. We talk 2 or 3 times a year. And
oh my gosh.
And so he gives me Bob's contact information. And I'm thrilled because, okay, I know that Bob by himself could, supply the photos for that crucial period. And after thanking my friend, I'm hanging up the phone. He goes, wait. You do know who Bob Jackson is, right? No, other than these photos. And that photo of Jack Ruby shooting Lee Harvey Oswald?
Wait a minute. Same guy?
Yeah, that's Bob Jackson.
No way. Whoa.
And 5-10 minutes later, I'm talking to a guy that was in the motorcade in Dallas. He worked for one of the Dallas papers at that point. He was in the motorcade on November 22nd, 1963, and 2 days later was in the basement of the Dallas police station and took the photo that everyone remembers and that won Bob a Pulitzer Prize.
Oh, my gosh. Well, thank goodness you asked that last guy about him. Wow. Well, you just never know. That's why I always say you got to ask, because you never know or you'll never get. So, wow, what a cool story. Well, I'm so happy that you wrote this book. Of course, the book we're talking about today, Texas legend Jim Hall and his Chaparrals, by today's guest, George Levy. And you can go back and find the other books that George has written and put together on his show notes page on the Cars Yeah website, or just Google him or go to Amazon. You can find all of them. This particular book is from our friends at EVRO Publishing. They do some great books. We've had many on this show before. I'm going to leave you with this. Well, actually, before I leave, I want to ask you this question. If I could put you in any of Jim's cars to take some laps, Laguna Seca or wherever you'd like to go, which car would you like to drive?
I think it would probably be the 2E. It would be a tough choice between the 2E and the 2J sucker car, except if you've ever seen that car demonstrated. I don't know if you would have seen it back in the day, but I was too young. But every year at the Petroleum Museum in Midland, there's an entire wing devoted to Chaparrals, and every year they have a party there called the Party on the Patio, and they demonstrate one of the cars in front of the museum. And the 2J is just ear-splittingly loud. And when I interviewed Jackie Stewart about driving the car, he was like, my ears are still ringing from that snowblower
Yep.
motor that was in the back of the thing. But, probably the 2E with the movable wing, because that's the car that if, in the latest issue of Motorsport magazine, they have an excerpt of that chapter, and it's titled "The Car That Changed Everything," and that's the way I feel about it.
Very cool. Which track should I put you at in that thing?
You know, I have a great fondness for Riverside, but you can't go there anymore. But let's say Road America.
There you go. That's a great place. I got to race a vintage car there. So I love that track. Yeah, it's really cool. First time I went there, I did the 3-day driving school, open wheel driving school before I raced. That track is just magical. I don't know how to describe it, but it was just every of my 4 days, 5 days I spent there actually was just a magical place. So very, very cool. Plus, it's a fun place to be a spectator because it's just like roaming around parks and looking at all the great corners. So I love it. There's a quote in your book from Jim, "There's always a better way." I think that to me exemplifies him, always looking for a better way. You think about some of the greats in technology, innovation. That's kind of their approach. Would that be your success quote for the day?
Yeah, let's go with that. I think that's a great way of looking at life, and there always is a better way to do anything, and he dedicated his life to that.
Absolutely. Before I let you go too, we definitely need to talk just a brief moment here about Motorsports Hall of Fame of America. Can you tell our listeners who aren't familiar with that or haven't visited what you guys are all about there?
Yeah, the Motorsports Hall of Fame of America is located right on the grounds of the World Center of Racing at Daytona International Speedway. It is the Hall of Fame of all motorsports. We honor anything that raced with a motor in it, basically. So it's not just cars, it's motorcycles, planes, power boats. We induct people every year. There's a big Hall of Fame induction ceremony, which some people call the greatest night in motorsports, and it's very special because there are lots of great Hall of Fames, and they do things their own way, and I don't think there's any one perfect way, but the way we do it is we have 200 voters. I don't vote. There are no smoke-filled rooms. Our staff doesn't vote. The 200 voters, half of them are journalists, authors, historians. The other half are inductees themselves, and so on vote count night, we use paper ballots. You're literally sitting there opening envelopes from Mario Andretti and Richard Petty and Don Garlitz and Chip Ganassi and you name it, and finding out who they think should be inducted into the Hall of Fame that year. And we have a beautiful museum on the grounds of Daytona International Speedway that's open almost 365 days a year. So anyone that's in the Daytona area, by all means, come pay us a visit, and you can find out more about the Hall of Fame at mshf.com.
It's an awesome place. Check it out. I want to thank our mutual friend Judy Stropas for bringing George back here to Cars Yeah. Judy's brought so many amazing people to this show. So Judy, once again, I'm indebted to you. Thank you very much for getting us together again. George, thanks for coming back and spending some time with me. I am just thrilled. One thing I did want to mention, in the back of the book, the evolution of net downforce. There's a very interesting section in this book, and I'm an art fan. The illustrations are by Arthur Schenning. Am I saying his last name right?
Yep.
Yeah, Schenning, which are really marvelous. I mean, they're really cool. They're the kind of things that you want to frame and hang on the wall. That was a fun element that you added to the book that for people that aren't into racing can really understand the concept of downforce, the importance, and why it really works. Can you talk about that just real quick before we say goodbye?
Yeah. So, one of the things that I think people didn't really understand about the Chaparrals, because they look so different from each other. I think a lot of people's take on it was, well, he tried this, then he tried that, then he tried this other thing, and they were all very different ideas. And in many ways, that's true, but there was this one through line. There was this one consistent element that from the first Chaparral all the way through the Chaparral 2K IndyCar, which was that this progression of, okay, net downforce, that seems to be a powerful idea. And then how do you do it better and better? There's always a better way. And how do you keep evolving that until you get to the 2J as the sort of the culmination with full-time, maximum downforce. So Jim and I thought at the outset it would be great if there was a series of illustrations that could connect the dots from the very first Chaparral all the way through the 2K. And we looked at the work of a number of illustrators, and and there are a lot of great illustrators out there, but we finally agreed on Arthur's work. We just thought that would be a terrific way of visualizing that, and we're incredibly indebted to Arthur for the great work that he did on those illustrations.
Yeah, they're really great. And of course, that 2K driven by Al Unser, I believe, and Johnny Rutherford.
Exactly, yep.
Yeah, the yellow car. Yeah, the Pennzoil car. Awesome, cool. George, this has been great fun. I really appreciate you spending some time with me this morning and connecting. Awesome book. Listeners, if you've got an automotive library, this is one that needs to be on your shelf. I'll put links on George's show notes page, how to get your hands on your copy. George, until you and I talk again, I'll see you down the road.
Sounds good, Mark. Thanks so much. Appreciate it.
This was great. 20, 50, or 100 years from now, will there be a workforce to care for the collector vehicles we love? With auto shop programs disappearing across the country, it's a question we enthusiasts have to ask. That's why I support the RPM Foundation, which exists to ensure that the critical skills necessary to preserve and restore these vehicles aren't lost to time. One of the many ways RPM, which is short for Restoration, Preservation, and Mentorship, is accomplishing this goal is through workforce development initiatives. The RPM Apprenticeship Program enables the next generation of artisans to earn a living while they learn the craft of restoring and preserving these vehicles directly from industry professionals. The Endangered Skills Program documents the process of masters training future craftspeople on a variety of critical skills in danger of being lost forever. For more information on how the RPM Foundation is driving the future of the collector vehicle skills trade, visit RPM Foundation today. They're one of the charities of choice here on Cars Yeah!
Thank you so much for joining us on today's ride here at Cars Yeah! Drive on over to carsyeah.com to find show notes and inspiring automotive fun. Download your free copy of Filler Up, a fun book filled with gorgeous photographs of fuel filler fun, including quotes from more inspiring automotive enthusiasts. Download your copy today, and we'll see you next time on Cars Yeah!